Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Waterloo from 1970. I don't remember why this film was brought up recently. It was brought up in like the last month or two to me in some context, and I don't remember exactly why. But I was very curious about this one. Now, Dino De Laurentiis' name is all over this thing, which might lead you to think that he directed it, but he, for as far as I'm aware, only ever produced stuff. Dino De Laurentiis, for if you've never heard his name, is a extremely prolific producer, or was. I believe he's passed away now. Um, who is largely worked internationally, but started out working in post-war Italy. Fascinating history there. But anyway, he ended up producing this film directed by Sergei Bondarchuk, I believe is the pronunciation, who is a Soviet director. Not what I expected for a film about Napoleonic France, but hey, to leap way ahead. Well, no, I'm not going to leap way ahead. Let's talk about Waterloo. It is about the Battle of Waterloo and the preceding events. It is generally, I don't know my European history in general. I don't know like my late European history very well, and my knowledge of the Napoleonic era is basically zilch. I am vaguely aware of some of the major beats, but that's about it as far as it goes. Plus, whatever else one generally gets by cultural osmosis. So Waterloo is a one of the most well-known battles of all time. It is the second defeat of Napoleon, and well, not the final, but the wars and battles from this era are they would stretch for days, and they would go over hills and into the next town over and get named something else. So anyway, I digress. This is a fascinating one, and I'm going to use one word to describe it, and that word is spectacle. Because if there's one thing this film has, it is spectacle. Holy shit, I have never seen anything like this before. It is on a scale that is truly unbelievable. And I was confused about that until the credits, where there is a slide in the credits that says Dino De Laurentiis wishes to thank the Soviet Army for making this film possible. And so it turns out the reason for that is because there were 15,000 Soviet soldiers that were borrowed for the production as extras. Now, that's not to discount any of the work that went in. I'm sure it made the whole process cheaper. And apparently this was mostly filmed in Ukraine, which at that time was part of the USSR, and would have been basically free as a state production film. But anyway, I digress. That's not to discount the amount of effort that's going in here. The costumes are incredible. The they are doing enormous cavalry charges with hundreds, if not thousands, of people. There are many thousands of people in costume marching around. And while I will say that if you, in shots where you get enough people that you can like pick out individuals, if you watch individuals in almost every scene, you will pick out somebody doing some goofy shit because clearly these were not trained actors, not trained extras, and apparently like orders were being sent around by radio and then dispersed throughout the crowd. So I can't even fathom what the production must have been like. It's a spectacle unlike any I've ever seen, and unlike any that will probably ever be made again. I can't fathom how, or why for that matter, anyone would make something of this scale practically. It's just like wrangling that many people for any reason, let alone for a film, is a truly insane endeavor. So the problem is the movie's not that good. Now, I don't want to get off on the wrong foot. I think this movie is probably worth watching just to absorb the visuals and the production value that are on show here. But the movie's just not very good. It primarily focuses on two characters, Napoleon and his counterpart on the other side, that being the Duke of Wellington, who is the British commander in this case. The historically speaking, this was a between there was a coalition of other countries that were all against Napoleon, who frankly, if he had been a little less aggressive during the growth of his empire, and maybe stuck to France, probably could have, had less of a hard time of it. But I digress. I don't know shit about the history. Anyway, yeah, so he was pretty widely disliked, and so there were a lot of people against him. So there are these two primary characters and a lot of secondary ones on primarily the British side, actually. Secondary characters, named characters that we are supposed to pay attention to and care about to some extent. The problem is that almost nobody is really characterized particularly well. I would say that the Duke of Wellington, who's played by Christopher Plummer, by the way, and I think is a great casting, is they're all they're not really characters. The minor characters are not very, they don't even particularly have an arc, and the two major players are also, they barely have an arc of their own. Obviously, this is only over a couple of, for the most part, over a couple of days. But the characterization just doesn't go very far to get into what might otherwise be an interesting, like, drilling into like the mindsets of these two generals on the field, and trying to figure out their strategies and seeing them react to the changing battlefield. But that doesn't happen. The two leads do their absolute best with what they have, with the script they have, with the scenes that they have to portray those things, but ultimately it's not backed up by a storyline that helps to realize them as characters. And the rest of it sort of falls apart around that. I think the movie was supposed to stand on its own more. Well, no, I can't even say that. I was thinking that the movie had to stand, it was expected to stand on its own, that like you're expected to already know the story of the battle and therefore not have as many questions about what's going on. But really it's just for all the apparent historical inaccuracy, it's, I guess it's just a mess. It's a very interesting to look at mess. And as a like historical drama or like a reenactment thing, it's interesting. But whether or not that makes it a good movie, I think I have to land on the side of no. I do think, like I said before, that it's probably worth watching once, if this is the kind of thing you're interested in at all, for the things that it does do well, but those things are limited. Comparatively speaking, I couldn't help but watch this and think about Ran from Akira Kurosawa, which was made like 15 years after this, actually. Which is not as grand in scale, couldn't possibly be, but is it has a substantial amount of the plot, a substantial amount of the runtime dedicated to similarly spectacular, like large scale combat battles, just seeing what one can muster with an epic story, and with epic proportions in the production values. Yeah, I can't fault the actors on this one. A lot of them do their best. Even there are a few characters that I don't really like at all, even, and yet I can't fault the actors because it seems like entirely down to writing problems of like either why does this character exist, or why are they doing this thing, or why is this event pertinent, and it's always a problem even when there's a payoff. I'm just gonna go off on a tangent for a second here. So even when there's a payoff to something weird that was set up before, the weird setup always still feels weird, even if it pays off later in a way that makes sense. And I think that's something that needs to be kept in mind when structuring that kind of story beat or like short arc for a character. I feel like there's a good movie in here. The beginning of the movie is very slow, and it's done in a really interesting way. There are points during that first portion of the film that do seem that they are a little bit too preoccupied with showing off their own grand scale, and with being a little bit self-congratulatory in the production values. But I don't think it's unearned. It doesn't cross into the realm where it's too much. And so actually the first half-ish of the film, I do really like and appreciate the really slow pacing, with a few exceptions that are just kind of awkward. The substantial part of the second half being the battle itself and the lead up and the taper off is really where the pacing seems to lose itself. And even trying to it comes from probably having too much footage to work with and too much spectacle that you don't want to leave on the cutting room floor. And I understand that temptation, but if you sacrifice your pacing as a result, and so like there's a long scene because you really wanted to show this thing, and then suddenly there's an abrupt halt or an abrupt change to a different scene, or you just like there's a lot of scenes that feel like they just come to an end and then the next scene starts and there's a brief intro from like one of the commanders to say, this is what we are doing now. Not quite so explicitly. It's not that awkward, but basically the functional part of them talking is to say, here is what we are doing next in some form or another. And unfortunately, that still doesn't quite fix the haphazard, like chunked together nature of the battle and the illegibility of the strategy from the viewer's perspective. Weirdly, I would ask for more exposition in order to like sort of show where the movie is trying to go, rather than just saying it's a battle, enjoy the battle. Yeah. There are two really good movies in here, actually, I think. One with all the battle stuff and one with all of the pre-battle stuff. Yeah, it's a real shame it doesn't come together, though. Yeah, the sound editing is a bit here and there. Actually, it's mostly bad. There's a substantial amount of ADR that doesn't always. Some of it works, some of it doesn't work. Some of it is just straight up distracting. There's obviously a lot of cannon fire and gunshots and horse neighing going on in the latter half. The former half, the prior half, the first half, really uses music and audio pretty sparingly and in a pretty nice way that lays emphasis to the preparations and the context of what's going on. But I guess it's hard to decide whether the editing and the audio editing and the battles themselves are particularly bad, or if it's just the nature of the chaos of the battle itself. It's a weird one. I think it's just ends up being neutral. Yeah, it's a really visually interesting film and a fascinating one as a production altogether. I would love to know more about how this production happened, and all of the things that went into like how it got produced. It is fascinating. I mean, Soviet cinema in general is kind of fascinating to me, but especially something like this. Yeah, I can't even fathom making a movie like this. And I don't know why or how they even sort of got it produced in the first place. It's interesting, though. If this is at all up your alley, for all of my negative feelings about most of it, I think it's worth watching. If you've seen it before, let me know your thoughts. I'm very curious. This one will probably stick with me for a little while, but I don't think I would rewatch it. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.